Good evening. I want to officially call the Federal Way School District Board of Education meeting to order on today. I haven't even opened up my packet yet. August 25th at 6 o'clock. And first thing we're going to do is roll call, and I'll start to my left.
Hiroshietto, Director, District 5.
Carol Gregory, Director, District 4.
Claire Wilson.
Danny Peterson.
Tammy Campbell.
And President McAnally is not with us tonight. Next thing I want to say is that we are reconvening from executive session, and there won't be any action that will be taken. And I'd like you all to stand and please join us in the flag salute. And Director Peterson, if you would please lead us.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. First thing on the is the approval of the agenda. Is there a motion on the floor to approve the agenda?
Move that the Board of Education approve the meeting agenda of August 25th, 2015 as submitted.
Is there a second?
I second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Oh, any discussion? Excuse me. No. Okay, moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. I'm looking for approval of the consent agenda.
I move that the Board of Education approve the consent agenda of August 25th, 2015 as submitted.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
That's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Director Gregory?
Yes, I am going to go ahead and vote for the consent agenda, but I do have a concern, and it's the same concern I raised last year around ASB constitutions and the restrictions put on the eligibility to participate. I think what we have is not appropriate for the democracy that we live in, and I would very much like to know what happened to the conversation, or was there a conversation after this was raised last year, and asked that this be looked at. I've heard nothing more.
I will follow up with the board to give you an update on that conversation and where we are.
All right. Any other discussion?
I also recollect that dialogue, and I recollect that it had to do with some sort of inequity relative to running for office, school office, and being inconsistent with being on a sports team. The grade standards were much higher for running for office, and that's just not how we run in a democracy, and so there was inconsistency. And I, too, agree that there was not closure on that, so it would be good to have a closed feedback loop on that.
All right. Any other discussion? So we've had a move and second and some discussion. Any others? I'm going to call for a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you. Superintendent Campbell.
At this time, I'd like to invite our leadership team up to introduce some new administrators. This is an exciting time when we get new folks who can come in and help us with our work. And I'd like to start off by having Dr. Danny Pfeiffer come up and introduce two people who will be a part of her team.
Good evening. Vice President Wilson, members of the board, Dr. Campbell. With pleasure this evening, I have an opportunity to introduce to you Mr. Martin Boonstra, the new Director of Assessment and Accountability. Mr. Boonstra comes to the Federal Way Public Schools with 12 years of experience as both a teacher and a principal. He served as an elementary school teacher for 6 years before transitioning to the role of principal. Most recently, he served as a principal in the Pittsburgh Public Schools for 5 years, focusing on turnaround school efforts in struggling schools, before moving to Washington State just 3 months ago and joining the Renton School District as the principal of Cascade Elementary. Excuse me. During his tenure in the Pittsburgh Public Schools, Mr. Boonstra led school improvement efforts focused on a strong vision of high-quality instruction and learning for all students. The foundation for his work as a principal was grounded in a collaborative model focused on using multiple forms of data to drive decision-making, high expectations for all, and equity. Throughout his career, he has been called upon to lead and or support school district initiatives related to student learning, instruction, and data-driven decision-making, which he will draw on in his new role. Mr. Boonstra graduated with a bachelor's degree from Eastern Michigan University and obtained his master's degree in curriculum and supervision and his principal licensure at the University of North Carolina. On a personal level, Mr. Boonstra is the father of a beautiful 3-year-old daughter, enjoys traveling, spending time with his family, and playing a round of golf. Once again, please join me in welcoming Mr. Martin Boonstra.
Good evening, Vice President Wilson, members of the board, and Superintendent Campbell. I'm very honored and humbled to be here to serve as the Director of Assessment and Accountability with the Federal Way Public Schools. Throughout my career as a teacher and more recently as a principal, in the last 5 years, I've demonstrated a strong commitment to all students having an opportunity to be challenged at high levels, engaged in learning, and valued. And making sense of data and using data thoughtfully and with purpose has always been at the forefront of the work that I have done to improve outcomes for students, and I think importantly to make schools a place that welcomes and supports all students and all families. So I'm very passionate about the work of educating students, and I'm especially excited to be a part of a school district that is committed to educating all students. I look forward to working with our leadership team and being a part of the Federal Way Public Schools. Thank you very much.
Vice President Wilson, members of the board, Dr. Campbell, it is now my pleasure that I introduce to you Ms. Melissa Spencer, the new Program Administrator for Elementary Standards-Based Instruction and Professional Learning. Ms. Melissa Spencer comes to Federal Way Public Schools with 17 years of experience as a teacher and central office literacy specialist. She holds a bachelor's degree in English from the University of Notre Dame and a master's degree in teaching from Johns Hopkins University. She is currently enrolled in the Leadership for Learning EDD program at the University of Washington. Ms. Spencer has been a classroom teacher at the elementary level, an instructional coach, and has specialized experience in reading recovery. Most recently, Ms. Spencer worked as a central office team member of the district support team in Kent School District, where she collaborated with district level, building level, and school level teams in turnaround literacy efforts. She brings a naturally collaborative disposition, broad perspective, and a dedicated focus on student learning. On a personal level, Ms. Spencer shares that traveling throughout the United States and around the world has influenced her work as a leader. She is also the mother of 3 beautiful children here with us this evening, and Ms. Spencer shares that she is excited about joining the Federal Way team and working with principals and teachers to improve instruction for each student. Once again, please join me in welcoming Ms. Melissa Spencer.
Vice President Wilson, board directors, and Superintendent Campbell, I'm very excited to be here at the Federal Ways Public Schools. I'm really looking forward to the opportunity as working as the administrator for elementary instruction. Instruction has been my passion from the day one when I stepped into a first grade classroom. I really believe education opens pathways for all students, and instruction is the way forward. And I look forward to supporting teachers and principals, and I'm really excited to be here. The team already has been so welcoming and collaborative in nature, and I'm excited to be a part of that team. Thank you.
Cindy Black to the podium.
Good evening. It's my pleasure tonight to introduce Dr. Terry Meisenberg as the new interim principal at Meredith Hill. Terry's had a wonderful career, most of which was in Tacoma. He was a teacher, a counselor, a middle school principal, and an assistant superintendent for middle schools, special education, and counseling services. He also served 5 years in the Bethel School District as an assistant superintendent for human resources, as well as a supervisor for K-12 principals. Most recently, Terry worked in the Seattle Public Schools as the Director of Employee Relations in HR, where he was the chief negotiator for all employee contracts. And last year, he was the interim principal at Cascade, a K-8 school. So Terry is happily married to his wife, Paris. They have 3 children and 6 grandchildren that they love to spoil. And Terry says he's delighted and privileged to be a part of the Federal Way Public Schools and at Meredith Hill. And I think we're privileged to have him join us on our team this year. So welcome, Terry.
Never pass up an opportunity to speak to the board, right? I really feel privileged to be here. Can you imagine in my career that after all the great things that I've gotten to do, that I end up in Federal Way at Meredith Hill Elementary as a principal? Probably the best job in the state of Washington. And I'm going to work with our kids, I'm going to work with our staff, and I'm going to work with our parents. And our goal is simple. Our goal is to really provide the best education that kids can get, and we're going to do that, and we'll do it well. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a privilege to be here, and Dr. Campbell and her whole staff have bent over backwards to make the first month everything that I would hope for, and likewise with the Meredith Hill parents and staff. They've been just fabulous. So thank you on behalf of Paris, my wife, and myself. Thank you very much. I love being a part of the district.
Thank you, Terry. Nicely done. Next, I'd like to invite Vince Blauser up. He will introduce 2 more administrators.
Yes. Good evening, Vice President Wilson, members of the board, Superintendent Campbell. It's my honor to introduce to you 2 of our newly hired assistant principals, starting with Christian Storm. He's the new assistant principal at Thomas Jefferson High School. A little background on Christian: he received his Bachelor's of Arts in Psychology and History from UCLA and his Master's of Education Administration from Sacramento State. He spent 7 years as a teacher of history and PE in San Francisco and San Diego, and then spent 1 year of teaching in Germany at an IB school. He then returned, and this I loved, he spent 1 year teaching kindergarten in San Diego. In 2012, he moved to Washington and worked for 2 years as a dean of student at TJ. A few other facts about Christian: he served 6 years in the Army, including deployments in Iraq, and is currently serving part-time in the U.S. Army National Guard. As you can see, spare time is a luxury for Christian, and when asked how he likes to spend his time, he said long walks on the beach. So congratulations on your new position, Christian. So I'd like to it's my honor to introduce Sharon Norton, a new assistant principal at Truman campus. A little about Sharon. She has worked in the Federal Way Public Schools for the past 12 years, most recently serving as a dean of students at Sahalee Middle School. Prior to that, she served as a science TOSA, collaborating with district leaders and teachers across K-12, leading the transition to standards-based education, Common Core, and next-generation science standards. She began her teaching career at Todd Beamer High School, where she taught science and AP biology. She has come to education through the environmental consulting engineering industry, and says her perspective about education was strongly influenced by her work in that private sector and as a parent. She believes that learning needs to connect students' lives through providing rich, powerful experiences that help them make sense of the world around them. Please congratulate and welcome Sharon to her new position. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do you want to say something about our next agenda item, and then we can move forward?
Vice President Wilson, members of the Board of Directors, one of the things that we recognize as a team is the importance of celebrating the successes of our students and staff. As a result, we're excited to have the board recognize the accomplishments of both students and staff, and we're starting this off at this first board meeting, and we'll continue to do so.
So we're going to go in order that they are in the sheet, and you'll notice the high school, most of them are in the areas that are in our service area. So I get to be the first one, and it is the Mu Alpha Theta National Convention, and Thomas Jefferson High School places 7th in the nation. Thomas Jefferson's math team worked hard all year to compete at a nationwide competition during the summer. Students gave up their time to practice and prepare for nationals. With the help of sponsors, parents, students, and the Thomas Jefferson High School math team coach, TJ successfully competed against the top schools from all over the U.S. We have national champions Andrew Tablebag, who was first place in the Muchak Talk, Orgel Batzaya, who was first place in theta logs and exponents, and if I knew what they were, I would explain. And then the first place for the posters was the poster team of Erica Lee, Elise Bahang, Jody Bodas, and Vivia Zhu. Thank you. So the next is Director Eto.
Thank you. The news item I have here sends kudos to the cadets from the Todd Beamer High School Junior Reserve Officer Training Corps program. Headquarters Air Force selected cadets from Todd Beamer for the Silver Star Community Service with Excellence Award. This is one of the highest awards for the Air Force JROTC program, and it goes to only 45 out of 879 units, so about the top 5% of Air Force JROTC units in the country. And it's based on the average number of community service hours. The cadets there at Todd Beamer completed over 4,000 hours of community service last year and had one of the highest community service hour averages in the nations. So hats off to the cadets there at Todd Beamer High School.
I have the next one, and I hope I say the name correctly. This is a Federal Way student who attended the first ever youth gathering at the White House. This is a native student. Federal Way High School junior Ayanna Dawson made history this summer. She was one of only 5 non-tribally sponsored teenagers from Western Washington to attend the White House Tribal Youth Gathering in Washington, D.C., the first government-sponsored gathering of Native American teenagers from throughout the United States early in July. Ayanna's journey to the White House began last year when President Obama launched the Generation Indigenous Gen 1 initiative. Ayanna and other Native teenagers from 20 Western Washington school districts were already involved in an ambitious collaboration to create a leadership program for Native American high school-aged youth. The program, supported by the Western Washington Native American Education Consortium, launched this past school year, and Ayanna was one of the students selected to be in the inaugural class. She, along with teenagers from urban areas across the region, dedicated herself to developing her leadership skills and building cultural awareness and connections over the course of a full school year. Congratulations.
Well, I too have some good news to announce over here as well. As you've been watching the TV and the World Championships in Beijing, we have a student athlete extraordinaire here in our own midst in Federal Way. Federal Way Middle School track and field athlete qualifies for Junior Olympic Championships. Some of you might know of Anthony A.J. Frazier, a Lakota Middle School student, was the fastest recorded 7th grader in the nation this past track season at the 100-meter event. He ran a time of 11.48 during the Federal Way Middle School District Finals on June 11th. At the Junior Olympic Regional Championships at Jesuit High School in Oregon on July 10th through the 12th, he finished in the top 5 of the 100. This earned him a spot in the U.S. Track and Field Junior Olympic Championships at the University of North Florida in Jacksonville this past July 27th through August 2nd. So fantastic work by AJ. I'm proud of him as well.
Thank you. I will never run that fast, for I have very short legs. I'm going to give a little update, a legislative report, and I'm also going to look to my left to see whether Director Grigger might have anything to add. But what I can tell you is a couple things, and one is I'll start at the federal level that because of another position, the daytime position that I hold, I've been spending the last couple weeks meeting with federal staffers in preparation of a trip that we're taking to meet our federal delegation in DC, and that happens every September. And so we've been meeting with staffers to talk a little bit about how to become more prepared in making sure that the message we're giving, especially when you have very precious minutes with senators and with congressmen, how do you make the most of it and make sure that we're answering questions that their staffers already know they'll ask about. So we've met with staffers from Adam Smith's office, Patty Murray's office, and Dave Reichert. And really the conversations that we've had have surrounded the ESEA reauthorization, which is, on a fast track right now. And there's some real hope that there may be some bipartisan support to get things moving forward. And specifically talking around AYP and accountability, and also around federal pre-K, which is this universal concept of what happens to kids prior to ending kindergarten, and how do we make sure if we have federal programs that they align and leverage and support those state programs that are already in existence and our federal early learning programs. And so it's been that's been great to meet and to get some of those ideas, and I know that they'll also influence some of the happenings that are happening, some of the things that are happening in the state as well. And then I also want to really briefly talk about WASDA, which is our School Directors Association, the Ledge Assembly, and I'm the legislative liaison for the district, and Director McAnalloy holds a legislative position on the executive committee, so we really have two representatives from our district. And in early September, we'll be meeting together to review and to caucus and to vote on upcoming platforms. And just a little bit of information is there are really three different kinds. There are standing positions, and those are positions that they show up every year, and they show up every year because they're so important to everyone, or they're universally accepted kinds of platforms that they just are standing, and every year WASDA as a group supports them until they're either eliminated or until they're amended. And then the other two would be the amendments that are made, and so they may or may not currently be standing, or it may be something new. But once it's brought to the legislative committee more than 2 times, 3 times or more, then it becomes something that they consider to be part of their standing platform. And those are the kinds of things we'll be talking about when we get together in September. So currently there are 9 standing positions. There are 6 amendments that the Legislative Assembly will be looking at, and then there'll be 6 positions that they're looking to eliminate, and some of that is because they're combining some, and some of them because they've been dealt with or taken care of, or the situation has changed. And once we come back from the Assembly, then we'll actually have the slate of proposal, the slate that that WASDA will be working on as we move forward with this legislative session. So it's an interesting process, and one that is quite active. If you've ever been to a place where people choose platforms, and if you're at all interested in getting your voice to be heard and trying to influence people and influence change in the system, it's a really great thing to become involved in. So that's kind of what's happening at the state scene. Anything about
What's happening, really?
Yeah. I know we don't have a special session called back yet.
No.
I know that potentially there's conversation happening, which is why there isn't.
Well, we're being called back next week, just to be updated, but it is my understanding that where we are now is that we have not been called back, because in order for us to be called back and efficiently use the time, we need to have a plan that we can consider. And to date, that has not been written. The leadership of both houses hopefully will soon commit to get together and begin to write that, after which then the rest of the legislature will be called down. It is not cost effective to bring the legislature down to sit while others are working on a plan. And so it makes a lot more sense to get a few together, do that well, and then we all come together. I might say the $100,000 issue, if you read the Supreme Court's decision, they're fining the legislature $100,000 a day. However, that money is to go into a special fund to be used for education. So we clearly will spend that money next year in education. So it's kind of a message to us, but it isn't money that's going to be taken from someplace else. It's education money. The other thing that's interesting, and there are 19 senators who are writing a letter to the Supreme Court because the issue that they are raising is the fact that the Supreme Court fined the legislature. However, the legislature is the only one that can pass any legislation spending money. So we are the power of the purse, and so we're going to have to get together and find ourselves, I guess, is how it will work. But basically what the Supreme Court was saying is, get down there, get busy, finish the plan, and present it to us. The money isn't really as big an issue right now because we know it's going into education. So we're all still waiting. It's more important to me that we have a good plan to consider than it is to go down and sit in Olympia. So I can't say we're not anxious, but we also know the reality. These are very, very complex issues. These are not simple issues. And I'll give you one example. I've been getting a lot of questions as the information comes out on what has to be considered about what is a levy swap, because that's going to be a term that's going to be before the public. And I would suggest that this might be something we either do at a board meeting or that we do in some communication to explain to our public what it is that's going to be talked about, because it's going to be confusing and it will impact every property owner in the state. So that's where we are.
Thank you. And for those of us with checkbooks, $100,000 sounds like a lot. And I know I hear that from parents every single day. But I also know in the scope of the millions or billions of dollars, 100,000 isn't that much, but it is, and our kids are worth it. So I know we're all hoping that things will move forward and we'll be able to fully fund education. So with that being said, we're going to move on to public comment, and we have one. And I will tell you we're making a little change tonight, and that change is you will not have a buzzer. You have a light. And the light says green means go, yellow means pause, and red means stop. So please keep your...
You've got other board members that haven't made comments.
We're on legislative news, and we haven't done board member comments yet.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry. Okay. So what we will say is keep your eye on the light, and when it's red, know that your 3 minutes is up, and if not, we'll give you a high five, but we're not going to push the button tonight. And that being said, first up, and the only blue sheet we have tonight is Gary Robertson, who would like to speak on school funding. Gary, thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you. Carol Gregory stole a little of my thunder there, but I'm still I got an important message to share with you. Okay, good evening, board members and Superintendent Campbell. Last week I submitted an article to the Mirror relating to school funding that I wanted to share with you. In what is known as the McCleary decision, the Washington State Supreme Court ruled that the state was not properly funding K through 12 education. After the 2014 legislative session, the court was very lenient because they could have cited the legislature for contempt of court. However, they exercised leniency, but at the same time sent them a very clear message to address the McCleary decision and fix the education funding problem in the 2015 legislative session. At the end of a legislative session that lasted 6 months, which included special sessions, the legislature increased the education funding and sent a required progress report to the state Supreme Court. Afterwards, both state school superintendent Randy Dorn and top officials in our school district agreed with me that the legislature did not comply with the McCleary decision. The state Supreme Court agreed, giving the legislature a failing grade, i.e. a grade of F, and fined them $100,000 a day. When it was announced on the local news, one reason cited was the fact that the legislature failed to address a 30-plus-year-old, outdated, and grossly unfair school funding formula that creates haves like Seattle and Bellevue and have-nots like Federal Way among the school districts. The money from the fine goes into a dedicated education fund and can be refunded back to the state if and when the problem is finally fixed. So the $64,000 question is, what is wrong with our legislators? Why can't they get the message and fix the problem? I wish I had the answer to that question, but instead of listening to Superintendent Dorn and fixing the problem, they chose to come up with another Band-Aid solution. Bad idea. So now the ball is in the governor's court, and it appears that he will call a special session once legislators come up with a solution that will hopefully satisfy the Supreme Court. Knock on wood. But like I told Sally McLean, you don't know when the legislature will come up with a solution and if it will be acceptable to the court. Therefore, you have no choice but to move forward and address the $4.8 million shortfall. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Superintendent Campbell.
This week has been filled with professional learning for our principals and teachers, and I've been out in buildings really seeing them sharpening the saw, getting ready for our students. I visited Totem, Mark Twain, Wildwood, Sacagawea, and Valhalla over the last few days. At Valhalla, I watched principals leading some powerful professional development for other principals, as well as I observed teachers learning what they need to learn to really be ready for our students. I will say if you were to go to many of our schools, you would see that schools are currently spending time looking at data, and they're really trying to figure out what it is that our students were successful at and what was it that they need to look at to get better. You'd see retreats, you'd see them really going away with the teachers becoming clear about what this year is going to be, what's the focus, getting that inspiration. I went to Nautilus, and the principal was out, and they were out doing home visits. I mean, it's pretty powerful that we've got principals that were in a van going out, looking at and connecting with their families, making sure that they felt comfortable in our schools. And also, I was at Wildwood, and after they were done in the morning with their PD, they were about to do a bus ride and take their teachers through the community. These are the types of things that I really want to be spending my time to show the focus on instruction and to really give just sort of the pat on the back that this is the right work and our kids deserve our focus in this manner. So more of this will be happening through the rest of the week, and we'll have our kickoff on September 1st, where we'll have 3,000 plus folks at the Christian Faith Center, and we're looking forward to you joining us there.
Thank you. All right, school board comments. Director Etto, would you like to start?
Okay, thank you. I received the newsletter recently, and I'm really impressed with how the newsletter is becoming a really excellent vehicle for communication, and I hope to see that improve as we go forward. I feel like the initiatives and areas of emphasis that I'd like to see happen are fairly consistent with where the new superintendent's heading. I fully understand under policy governance how it's not about the eaches and that we should govern at a high level, but I think it's important that people kind of understand where I'm at, and the superintendent can understand where I'm at. When I look at the budget, I think that we have to fulfill our promise to the taxpayers, that we have to finish the Federal Way High School, that we have to compensate our team well, and that we have quality facilities. And I think we're trying to do that without going into the red. And I understand that we've engaged the public in the budget process, which hasn't been done in quite some time. So I'm really glad to see that happening. In terms of priority programs, certainly we want to see student achievement go up. And I've had a sense that in a lot of ways what the teachers need are students ready to learn. And from that perspective, I've always felt that maybe counseling is an area that we need to have additional emphasis on, because a ratio of 400 to 1 seems to be unmanageable in my view relative to the social emotional needs of the students as well as the academic counseling. So hopefully I'll at least feel that the superintendent has taken these concerns and fed back in a thoughtful manner why it's not a priority, or there's other priorities that would work better, but I just feel like I have a better opportunity to understand where we're going to go and why, and that's a very good feeling. Another area I've always been interested in is to have students engaged, and one area is that they have the choice that's relative to their needs. And we talked recently just now about the Air Force ROTC, Junior ROTC program, and kudos that they've had. We have the Army very close by at Joint Base Lewis McChord, and so it's been an interest of mine that we should support the Army and have a Junior Army ROTC program, because the military, even though they may be downsizing, is still a very viable career option. And to have Joint Base Lewis McChord nearby and an Air Force ROTC program, it'd be nice to see an Army ROTC program. And so here again, if we look into it and there's reasons why we can't proceed it, or there's other priorities, great. But that's where I feel that we're kind of on board relative to seeing where our budgets are going to be, where our priorities are, and having community engagement. And that's very, very important to me, because that's something that we wanted to see, is greater engagement with the public, and something that in the conferences that we attended relative to policy governance, that is one of the weakest areas that we've had, is the linkage with the public, and I see that growing. And so I'm very, very hopeful for how things will be changing in this year and the years to come. Thanks.
Director Gregory.
Thank you. I also want to indicate my excitement with the communication strategies that we're using. I think that the story we're telling is beginning to be deeper and broader, and that's exciting, because there are a lot of things happening in a school district of this size, and one or two stories doesn't really talk about all the interesting things that can occur. I have spent the last couple of weeks talking to a lot of people about the opportunity for career pathways in our career and technical programs, and who some of our partners might be and how we might think about that. And I have had the opportunity to meet with Dr. Campbell to talk about what I know, and feel like I have now happily passed it off onto someone who could do something if the opportunity is there. So I'm going to participate as someone who can bring resources to the table, not the expertise to make it happen. So I appreciate being able to give you what I know and move on. Thank you.
Director Peterson.
Yeah, it's been a full month, August, for us as the board. I know earlier this month we did the board retreat, and that was a good experience. Just again, as we're launching here in the school year, for me, it's been being able to be out in the community. As we're in it's summer break and National Night Out earlier this month, and last week I was able to go to the Desna tournament over there at Sahali, and that was cool to see just the massive amount of crowds that were there for a great event that they've continued to extend and make bigger each year. It's back to school shopping time right now. I know my kids are busy doing that, and we're appreciative of groups like Communities in Schools, Grace Church, South King Fire and Rescue are doing their supply drive right now. We also have Red Canoe that's doing theirs as well. We also had the group, I know this last Saturday, did a cleanup day, just partnering with a school over at Enterprise. They had, again, South King Fire and Grace Church, and I think Community Schools, again, partnered with some other churches and other community organizations. And I know that was just one example of that, but I know that's happening in lots of different schools. It's that cool partnership of just groups in our community that really care for our schools and just find those needs that we're not able to tackle totally with all of our facilities, and just making it extra special for our kids when they show up, so they have the school supplies they need when they show up on the first day, and they have a campus that they can be proud of, and those little things that just didn't get hit in spring cleaning and whatever else that is just endless in a school this size. Having groups like that care is huge, and we're very appreciative of that. And I'm looking forward to a great start to our school year. And looking forward to the kickoff coming up next week. That's going to be great. And I think we have some great stuff ahead. So thank you.
Well, I had a couple things I wanted to say. That I had an opportunity to spend some time at the principal admin retreat that was at Todd Beamer High School last week. And I just sensed the vision of we. I sensed this focus on quality, and it was palpable excitement. People were really excited about the vision and about kind of what they see for the future for themselves and for the children and families in our district. I was able to attend the community meeting at Woodmont last week that we became aware of because parents came to our last board meeting and shared with us about the Valley City's potential treatment facility that, although it's on an 8-acre site right now, is focused on treatment, voluntary and involuntary treatment facility there. And we're very concerned around the proximity of not only Woodmont Elementary, but also the library, if you're familiar with that area. Again, this is an area where it's Des Moines property, it's Kenton, it's also Federal Way, and it's Auburn. So families were notified within 600 feet of the school. However, many of those families don't live in that Des Moines area. And if you were beyond that 600 feet, didn't necessarily notice that. And so there were 250 strong at the meeting, and I will say I was really impressed because there were parents from that school that organized that public meeting. They felt like they had not been heard, and the due diligence potentially hadn't been done. And there was a sense of fear. There was a lot of fear in the audience, but it also was a chance to gather information and to figure out maybe have we done all we could do, and I speak to Valley Cities and to the city of Des Moines, and a lot of it has to do with around zoning that has nothing to do with us, but what's clear and what's clear for families is the concern around safety of their community and their families, and that this is not the first thing, this is kind of the straw that broke their back. So as a community, they felt very powerful coming together. It was amazing when they looked at each other and realized how big they were. They were speaking a single voice, but there was also some reason in the group about if this is, then how is it that we become part of making the plans and making this the best it can be, and to make sure our children and our families are safe in our community. So I know Superintendent Campbell has been in contact with the mayor, and we'll stay in contact and stay looped in, and I'm also looped in with the families as the district is with those parents who set that meeting up. So I think together we'll work through whatever is to work through and come out with the best that we can to make sure our kids are safe. But I was impressed. Also had a chance today to spend a little bit of time at a staff retreat at the building level, and also to hear and to see and to feel the trickle down is wonderful. It means that people hear it and they're really sensing it, and then they're taking it and running with that. On Thursday, I'm volunteering at a back-to-school barbecue, which is also fun. I also have been checking out uniform closets because I'm also concerned oftentimes at this time of year when we have a uniform policy, we may have families that may not have access, and just want to make sure we're doing the most we can to advertise and to let families know if there are uniform closets or if there are places where families can access uniforms. I just think it's critically important. Kids don't want to look different. They want to fit in, and you even can fit out if you don't have a uniform that looks quite right. And then the only other thing I'll say is, Director Etto, I hear your words, and I also know that we are launching, and the district and Superintendent Campbell's launching into our strategic planning process. And I think that's a wonderful opportunity to look at our data, to look at where our children are, where our families are, where our community is, and to use those focus groups, those conversations, and those plans to move us forward in whatever way is going to reach us to the, our vision for our best things for our kids and families. So I'm looking forward to being part of that and drawing our community in to be part of that conversation. All righty. With that, I am going to bang the gavel. And by banging the gavel, what I am doing is I'm doing an official recess to official public hearing on the 2015-2016 budget. And I'm going to call on Superintendent Campbell to introduce it. And then I know that I think Sally's going to be doing the presentation, right? But I'm going to let you introduce the presentation. Bang gavel, recess. Yes.
Thanks for your guidance. At this time, I'd like to invite Assistant Superintendent of Operations and Finance, Sally McLean, to the podium. She will be sharing with you information that would lead us to action upon adoption of the 2015-16 budget.
Thank you. Good evening, Vice President Wilson, members of the board, Superintendent Campbell, staff, and our audience members. It's my pleasure this evening to share with you a high-level overview of the 2015-16 budgets. Again, the purpose of this evening is to take public comment during this public hearing, if any is submitted to you, and then ultimately, after you close the public hearing, to seek board approval of the 2015-16 budgets as required by WAC 392-123-054 by way of resolution 2015-16. It is coincidental that the fiscal year and the resolution numbers are the same. My goals this evening are to provide an overview of the general fund budget. It's been some time since we've had a work study. We have we had the legislature adjourn, and so this is your opportunity to get an update on where the general fund finally landed, and then provide a recap of the other funds that you're also required to adopt a budget for, which were presented at the last board meeting. And of course, the third goal this evening is to identify the preliminary calendar year 2016 tax levies as part of our action this evening. I want to just take a moment to remind all of us that the only reason we really talk about budgets and the only reason we have money is to help support outcomes for students. And so the Federal Way Public Schools vision statement that Dr. Tammy Campbell has been sharing with us talks about every student graduates with the skills, knowledge, and confidence that the global economy demands if they are to pursue college and careers beyond K-12. So certainly this is the vision that we have as we try to operationalize a very large organization with a very large budget to align those resources. And we look forward to continuing to align things as we go through the strategic planning process. If you happen to want to be following along, you also have a synopsis of the official state budget, which has a great name. It's called Form Number F-195. We color code everything that comes out of the business office on an annual basis. So our color for 2015-16 is orange. And within that document, there are slip sheets that are color coded for the funds. So I just am pointing that out in case you have interest in following along with that F-195 document. So here you can see we're going to be talking about the general fund budget, sort of slip covered with this salmon color. And I think you've heard certainly conversation about the good and the challenge. And I do want to compliment the Washington State Legislature for the work that they did do this last session, because they did provide a significant increase to K-12 funding, including a COLA for staff. And it's that cost of living adjustment, or that COLA, along with the pension fund increases, that caused us such a challenge with developing the final general fund budget. And the reason there's a challenge, and you're going to hear me talk about this a couple times this evening, is because there's a discrepancy or a gap between the revenue and the expenditure. There's a 30% discrepancy between the state salary allocations, or the revenue, the money that comes in, and our market midpoint labor costs. Or if you think about that phrase, market midpoint, maybe convert it to something that sounds a little friendlier, like median wage or average wage. So the revenue we get in versus the expenditures we put out for our labor costs, which are average costs, there's a 30% gap there. And that's compounded by our increases in the pension fund the pension fund rates also. And as we've talked about and have been talking about for a number of months, those two components, the 3% cost of living adjustment and the 3% increase in the pension fund rates, creates about a $4.8 million challenge for Federal Way Public Schools for 2015-16 and beyond. This next slide gives you a high-level review of changes in revenue. So you get a sense of where we were with the 14-15 budget and where we're headed with the 2015-16 budget. So remember, every budget has three components. It has revenues, it has expenditures, and it has fund balance. And we'll be talking about each of those three components in all five of the funds this evening. So the budget that was adopted for 2014-15 had a revenue budget of $240,600,000. At the high level, these are the four changes that have occurred between 14-15 and the budget in front of you, 2015-16. We added a $2 million, we increased our revenue contingency from $5 million to $7 million. We also have a $5 million expenditure contingency that was increased to $7 million. So these two pieces equal each other out on the revenue and the expenditure side. And as we'll note at the end of the meeting, the reason we do that is because when you adopt tonight's resolution and adopt these budgets, you set a maximum expenditure level. Given the unprecedented opportunity to have the legislature back in session this year, I don't know if that means we'll end up with any additional funding during the school year, but if we do, we certainly want to be in a position to be able to spend it. We have seen some small increases in our federal funding, most specifically in Safety Net and in Title I, for a total of $1.2 million. As you know, in order to bring to you a budget that is balanced, we are including a recommendation to increase the local educational programs and operations levy collection for 2016 to be equivalent to the voter authorization. And then our big increase, yes, we got $23 million in new state funding for this coming year, 2015-16, for a total of $271,500,000. So questions people should be asking is, well, what are you doing with that $23 million? And let me tell you a couple of those things. Of that $23 million, 62% or $14.2 million of it comes with what I call strings attached. $5.9 million supports programs that are categorical in nature. You get that revenue and it can only be spent to support those programs. So ALE is the Alternative Learning Experience. 1418, or the Open Doors program, is the Dropout Retrieval program. Special education is a categorical program, which is often referred to as SPED. Our career and technical education funding is categorical: English language learners, learning assistance program, and transportation. Again, that's money that comes in to support very specific activities as defined by the individual grant applications that we actually have to make for all of those expenditures, with the exception of transportation. That $5.9 million also includes the state-funded portions of COLA, pension, and health care for those particular categorical programs. We saw a $4.5 million increase in basic education. Basic education generally pays for classroom teachers and the support staff around classroom teachers, and that includes our state-funded portions, as I mentioned earlier, of COLA, pension, and health care. We saw an increase in class size reduction funding and full-day kindergarten. Due to a very late rule interpretation by OSPI, actually on August 12th, that has given us the opportunity to bring to you a budget that's actually balanced this evening, assuming those rules stay intact. And then, of course, other strings attached money includes Running Start. When students attend Running Start, the money comes to the school district, but we turn around and pass it to the college or the community college that they're attending. So really high level, but at 62% of that 23 million, or 14.2, is pretty much mandated in how we spend it. So what are we doing with the remaining 8.8 million? Well, the largest piece of that is a significant contribution to material, supplies, and operating costs. For those of you who have listened to me over the years, you know I talk about people and things. MSOC, material, supplies, and operating costs, are things. And this $7.2 million contribution will allow us to make some expenditures and some investments in buildings and curriculum materials that you'll hear me talk about in a minute. The other two small pieces are an $800,000 increase in local effort assistance and then an $800,000 increase in basic education enrollment growth. One could argue that that's strings attached because if you have more kids to serve, you have to have more teachers. So you can split that hair either way, I guess. Theoretically, we could just serve kids without hiring any more teachers, but that's not what we've done. So if I take that $23 million, as I just did, and broke it into the sort of strings attached versus unrestricted funds, how are we spending that $8.8 million? I keep waiting for my green light to turn yellow. We are actually making a $2.4 million investment in school buildings, in roofs and boilers. And again, because of that late shift in the class size reduction rules, we are no longer recommending to the board that we need to borrow this money. We are actually believe that the revenue from the state is adequate to cover this expenditure. So I am very pleased to be able to share that with you. We also have a variety of other MSOC increases that total $1.5 million. That ranges from a $200,000 election costs for the upcoming tech levy to general utility inflationary increases. As we've talked about, we have a commitment to, and Dr. Tammy Campbell has been very firm about her commitment to attract and retain the best staff. We have $2.8 million in collective bargaining agreements that this $8.8 million of unrestricted funds will support. We have made a commitment to increase school building staff, particularly in our elementary schools, beyond the changes that would have occurred because of enrollment or because of trying to reduce class size. And that includes the expansion of family liaisons to the remaining 8 elementary schools. It includes the addition of 5 counselors and deans and the expansion of elementary assistant principals. And then we have a small commitment to transition support as we continue to work on realigning and building a team to move forward into 2015-16. I know you've heard the COLA challenge. This is not the Pepsi challenge. This is the COLA challenge. And the 2015-17 state biennial budget contains the first COLA and pension increase that K-12 employees have seen since 2008-09. This is really great news for employees, as in my personal opinion, COLA is long overdue. As we talked about earlier, the underlying formula inequity still exists. So here I flip that equation around where we talk about the expenditures, and the state only covers about 70% of the actual compensation costs for basic education. That's that other side of that 30% gap. And we know that for every 1% in compensation costs, we need $800,000 in local levy to cover that. So that's that 3% COLA, 3% pension, 6% times $800,000 is what gives us that $4.8 million challenge. So while McCleary declares the reliance on local levies to be unconstitutional, the disparities between salary allocations and salary costs between revenue and expenditures have not yet been resolved by the legislature. So these unfunded impacts are covered by increases in the local levy. The next slide I know is busy because it provides you with a recap of our voter authorization for our educational programs and operations levy. The middle column shows you the legal limit, or what is sometimes referred to as the levy authority, and the far right-hand column shows you the certified EP&O levy. It is board action that certifies that EP&O levy, and you might recall this last October, Executive Director Jerry Carlson brought to you a proposal to certify the levy for 2015 about $5.4 million below the legal limit. And the box with the blue shading talks about the fact that we have really had 4 years of constant EP&O collection, all years below voter authorization, and 2014 and 15 is below the legal limit. And now, and certainly that made sense during a time when we had no unfunded COLA to cover, but at this point in time, we have that same $4.8 million that we keep talking about. And so we are thankful that the voters have given us the ability, and we're willing to support an increase in the levy, and now we need to do that in order to have a balanced budget. The third component of the general fund is fund balance. I would remind you that Administrative Policy 6024 requires our committed fund balance to range between 3 and 5% of projected annual operating expenditures. So when budgeted expenditures increase, so does the committed fund balance. And here is a peek of the budgeted ending fund balance as presented in Form F-195. So our total budgeted ending fund balance is $18,387,000. The committed fund balance, which is 3% of expenditures, is $8,136,000. Unassigned fund balance is $6.9 million, and the two of those together fall just a little outside of that 3 to 5% range that we have identified in our administrative policy. And then we have 3 other pieces of fund balance that from an accounting perspective we're required to account for, but they're basically not funds that are available to us to do anything else with and have sit in this category. That's a lot, I know. So now I'm going to shift to just the 5 summary pages so you know what we're talking about. When we look at the general fund budget, in summary, again, I want to point out the fact that this is a balanced budget. It's the first time in a number of years that we've been able to present a balanced budget to the board. We have a budgeted beginning fund balance of $18,087,000. We, of course, don't actually know what that number will be until close to November. You see the budgeted revenues and the budgeted expenditures. You'll notice budgeted expenditures are in bold with a little asterisk. That's because when you adopt your resolution, what you're setting is that maximum appropriation level in the general fund of $271,200,000. ASB, setting maximum appropriations of $3,673,000. Debt service, $20,289,700. Capital projects, $56,136,000, along with a $710,000 transfer to debt service. Just want to point out to you that we are budgeting every resource we have available in capital projects to ensure that we don't have to come back and ask for a budget extension while construction at Federal Way High School is ramped up so significantly this year. Transportation Vehicle Fund has a slightly less than $1 million budget at $935,300. So your next steps are to accept public comment and reconvene to regular session. You have the ability then, I'm sorry, I have this resolution number wrong in both places here, to adopt resolution 2015-16, which set the maximum appropriation levels. And then I just want to point out that we're continuing to work on the revenue anticipation note for the capital projects, and that will be brought to you at a future meeting. Just again, a recap of the levies. The general fund EP&O levy has a $53 million revenue. The full voter authorization budgeted. We will bring to you the actual levy authority in October. That doesn't get calculated by OSPI until late September. The debt service fund levy for the calendar year 2016 is currently set at $17.2 million. And then the capital projects fund has 2 voter approved levies in it. $4.4 million for the tech levy, and I will note that 2016 is the last year of current year of voter authorization for the tech levy, and then the $10 million for Federal Way High School. And you've seen these numbers before. So with that, I will allow you to continue with your public hearing or ask any specific questions you might
Does the board have any questions before we ask for public comment, if there's any from the floor?
Sally, could you provide a summary of what the public input was from our forum on the budget?
I can do that.
Thank you.
You mean when we pulled together the community members? Unanimously, they were supportive. In fact, they gave us strategies like making the video, creating a flyer to really communicate the gap that Sally described tonight. So my description of that, and you can certainly add, Sally, was that the community was really supportive. There were people in the room here tonight who were there as well.
Who were there? I concur.
Any other questions from the board? Do we have any members of the community or public comment? If so, feel free to come to the podium. Maybe what you could do is state your name, and that would be helpful. Thank you, sir.
Steve Mayer. We used to say area we're from, so I'm from the Maryland Hill area, if you still want that. I know this is not a question and answer, so I'll propose it, and perhaps you can ask it of Sally. It seems like in addition to needing to fund the gap, which is the COLA gap that she talked about, it also seems like there may be some wisdom in making sure that we are at the top end of our levy spending. If you think back to is it Duran, is that how we say it, to the 77 decision that is caused, as you've talked about many times, through all of these coming on 30 years now, where we have been underfunded because we were below levies in that. If I understand what the legislature is supposed to do, is to make sure that that doesn't happen. But isn't there some wisdom in addition to balancing the budget in doing all that and making sure that we are collecting everything we can, so if there is some trigger like that, we don't get penalized? That would be my only question. Other than that, I would say the budget is well done and looks reasonable, and it is good to have some money flowing in and to have a balanced budget for the first time in a long time.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Then I'm going to call us back into and reconvene to a regular board meeting. And with that, we'll ask and seek approval of Resolution 2015-16. Director Gregory?
I move to approve Resolution 2015-16 to fix and adopt the 2015-2016 budget.
I'll second that.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion?
Well, I'll just comment my perspective on this. From what I understand, we're going to finish the school, the high school, so we're not going in the red, and we're not going back to the public to make sure that we keep that promise. Team compensation is fair within the resources that we have. And if anyone has the idea that because the legislature gives us 70%, that somehow Federal Way is 30% overstaffed or paying 30% higher than what's required, that's not the case. It would be just like the city here saying that if they send police to one particular neighborhood, you have to tax yourself an additional 30% to pay for that service. Now, if you did that with the police, you'd hear quite an uproar. So why does it work with education is beyond me. But the 30% gap has nothing to do with any mismanagement. And in fact, the cost benchmarking study that I saw done by Tacoma showed that Federal Way for a long time has had a very low overhead rate. And so when a new superintendent comes in and says, what's wrong with this picture, and has to hire a new chief academic officer to be on par with other school districts, that's the reason why. We just have not been funded fairly, and hopefully the legislature will fix that. I saw that counselors were addressed, and I understand from discussions with Dr. Campbell that assistant principals and a lot of different people, deans, have various roles relative to social and emotional counseling for students. And so it's going to take some readjustment of what all those capacities are to figure out whether or not we've got the right counselor ratio. But I see that that's addressed. And I know that there was some tense feelings about family liaisons, and we showed through data that family liaisons were very important in terms of student engagement, and the data showed that the parents who were engaged really made a difference. And so I see that that's supported within the budget. So from every aspect, including the public input, it seems like a very easy vote for me.
Thank you. Any other input from board members?
I just want to say thank you to Sally and her team. You know, I've seen a lot of these Form F-195s in my term here on the board, and they're thick and, you know, and they're great nighttime reading right before you go to bed. And no, just there's so much that goes into this budget, so much that the community and public doesn't understand. You know, all the stuff it's necessary, you know, stuff from the state that they do give mandates, and some of that stuff is good. And there's other parts of it too that really make, you know, your job difficult and trying to figure out and the rules and all that and how it all plays. And I just want to commend your team. I remember the days of inconceivable and the budget cuts, and to see, you know, the years of cutting 30 million, now we're being able to add it in different places. And I think where we're doing it is we're doing it strategically in the places that are necessary as we are growing. And new priorities and all those types of stuff. So it's a great budget, and you know, obviously it's just part of the process of doing the hearings and all those, and we're in our final hearing tonight and approving it for this 2015-16 school year. So thank you again, Sally and the team and superintendent and everybody. So it's a good process.
I would ditto thank you, and I would say you're my math magician in my world, and that you do just such a fine job of sifting and sorting and making things as understandable as they can be. So, because there is a lot of paper and a lot of numbers, but it doesn't mean a whole bunch unless you've got a framework and something to kind of hook it to. So I really, really appreciate that. And with that, we've got Director Gregory who'd like to say something.
I also want to thank Sally for everything she's done for us this past year, but also for the fact that this budget came very late. This isn't a matter of having, you know, all spring and summer to work on this. This budget came in late July, so, you know, I know the incredible work that's had to be done. You could estimate and guess and do whatever you wanted, but ultimately you had to have the real numbers. And thank you.
All right, it's been moved and seconded, and we've had some discussion, so I'd like to call for a vote. All those in favor of approving Resolution 2015-16 to fix and adopt the 2015-16 budget? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstention? Motion carries, and so does the budget. And unless there's anything else for the good of the order, I'm going to say we are done at a record 7:10 on this 25th of August. So thank you all. Carrie, are there any action items? I don't believe there are. Thank you, Director Peterson, for helping.